I have an important question that I think needs to be addressed. Are Minnesota Vikings fans and the Minnesota Vikings themselves living in a fantasy land right now following the Vikings' impressive offseason on paper? We are going to address that question after a rival NFL executive weighs in and has a skeptical attitude about the accomplishments from the Minnesota Vikings this offseason. But I got to tell you about 5-Star Bath Solutions of Minneapolis. My wife and I were in the business for a bathroom remodel, and we put out some feelers. I looked at some different companies. They said, well, we could finish it in 6 weeks. How much? About $20,000 to $30,000. Do you take care of mold? Not really. You'd have to hire out. So I'm like, 6 weeks? That's a long time being forced to use our downstairs bathroom. Then I found 5-Star Bath Solutions of Minneapolis. The project was done within 48 hours. This is what the bathroom used to look like. An ugly step going into the bathroom, moldy walls, hand railings we don't need, one sink, ugly looking blue floor, things getting in the cracks and crevices, and then voila. 48 hours later, a complete, updated, and renovated bathroom. Double sinks, waterproof shower, new mirror, new vanity. And here's the deal about bathrooms. When you update your bathroom, you get the money back because you're updating your house and creating more value in your house. You get that from the bathroom, you get that from the kitchen. So check out 5-Star Bath Solutions of Minneapolis to get your project done today in less than 48 hours. We loved it, and that's why I'm endorsing it, because they did a phenomenal job. And if you want your project done like we did soon, we didn't want to wait 6 weeks, give 5-Star Bath Solutions of Minneapolis a call. They have financial payment options, and a full bathroom remodel cost the same amount of money for a company that would have done it in 6 weeks. Check them out. All right. So the Minnesota Vikings and the fantasy land that an NFL executive believes the Vikings are living in right now. Take a look at this quote coming from an anonymous NFL executive. They told this to Mike Sando of The Athletic, who's an NFL insider. And I'm reading this from MinnesotaSportsFan.com. He's also one of my go-to website followers to see what's going on within that Minnesota sports landscape. The Purple Persuasion and MinnesotaSportsFan.com, the two best resources for Minnesota sports in Minnesota. And I'm not paid to say that. All right, here we go. Quote, the top 3 free agents Minnesota signed: guard Will Fries, defensive tackle Jonathan Allen, and defensive tackle Javon Hargrave, combined to miss 35 of 51 games last season. It's like the 2015 Colts all over again, signing older guys who have been hurt, who are on 3rd or 4th contracts, one executive said, referencing an Indianapolis team that added 30-something former stars: Trent Cole, Frank Gore, Kendall Langford, and Andre Johnson in free agency. You cannot build a team with old players, especially old players who have been cut because they were hurt. Now, one thing that we did talk about after the Vikings added these pieces at the most important positions, because there were holes on the Vikings roster, we did say that the one downside to the signings was that most of these players have an injury history. And it says right here, they combined to miss 35 of 51 games last season. So, as great as these signings look on paper, Will Fry's 5 years, Jonathan Allen, defensive tackle out of Washington, who's been healthy for a majority of his career. He had one bad year last year of injury. And defensive tackle Javon Hargrave, 32 years old, $15 million a year. As great as those signings look on paper, they could be devastating. Because if they get injured and are not consistently on the football field, then the Minnesota Vikings Super Bowl window, and still the toughest division in football, is not going to be as open as we all believe it could be. And you've got to be careful about decimating the Minnesota Vikings offseason right now, because injuries could happen to any NFL team anywhere. The Kansas City Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes, who's been healthy for a majority of his career, could go down with a broken ankles out for the year, torn ACL out for the year. So you've got to be careful to label guys as injury prone, because every single player in the NFL, you could argue, is injury prone because of the league that they play in. It takes one bad hit or one wrong step in the wrong direction for a guy to go down with a torn ACL or a ruptured Achilles, and voila, season's over. There are so many non-contact injuries in the NFL that could happen to any player. So I get that this NFL executive is looking at the signings of the Vikings and looking at what they did in the past, and they all have injury history, those three guys that he mentioned. But you've also got to be careful because it could happen to any team. On paper, the Minnesota Vikings offseason looks spectacular. And to push back against my last thought of every player is injury prone or could be injury prone is this. I do think that there are some people within that Vikings organization, and especially within the Minnesota Vikings fan base, that are living in a fantasy land right now because of how good it looks on paper. And I don't blame you for living in this fantasy land, because it is so easy to get caught up in how much the Minnesota Vikings did this offseason and how much money they spent to acquire players at specific needs like offensive linemen, defensive linemen, and the secondary. It's easy to lose your mind and lose track of what success really could be for the Vikings when you look at the signings they made, you look at their impact in seasons prior, and it's so easy to think, oh, you put these guys together on one team and voila, there's a Super Bowl. It's not going to be as easy as it looks on paper, especially because You walk into the 2025 season, and any of the 4 teams within the Minnesota Vikings division could win the division very easily. The Bears, Packers, and Lions and Vikings could win the division next year. Don't forget, going into this season, the Minnesota Vikings were the team that were the least likely to win the NFC North last year. And they didn't win the North. If you bet them to win the North, you still lost. But they were 1 game away from doing it. They win in the final week of the year, and they're probably NFC North champions. So you think about what paper means and the expectations for the Minnesota Vikings next season right now are off the roof because of how good this roster looks on paper. And I get all we have to do is judge it off of paper. But you also have to look at the facts of the situation too. The Vikings are going to start J.J. McCarthy, who's never played an NFL regular season down. We don't know how he's going to step into the NFL regular season. It's not going to be as seamless as we think. J.J. McCarthy was a winner at Michigan. He was a winner in high school. Well, Patrick Mahomes wasn't a winner at Texas A&M, or not Texas A&M, Texas Tech. Joe Burrow was a winner at LSU, sure. He's been a very good player, very good winner in the NFL. But it doesn't necessarily translate from college to the NFL. Did for Burrow. It could for McCarthy. But just because you're a winner in college does not mean you're going to be a winner in the NFL. Tua Tagovailoa, fine. He wins some football games. Is he really a big winner in the NFL after winning a college football national championship? No. Has he ever won a playoff game? I don't think so. So you've got to be careful about, oh, yeah, he's a winner in college, he's a winner in high school, NFL. Okay. What does that mean? It doesn't translate like that. So on paper, the Vikings look legendary. And it looks like they're just going to mow through the NFC North, which they still could, because on paper they do look like they could do that. But I don't think it's going to be that easy. And I do think that there are some Vikings fans and some people within that Vikings organization living in a fantasy land because of what they did this offseason, because of the guys that they brought in at the money that they brought them in for. Just because you have zillions of money and dollars to spend doesn't automatically mean it's going to translate into a winning football team. Every year you see teams with the most money to spend still at the bottom of the league. Now, it's a little different because the Vikings were at the top of the league and then they had the money to spend. But you see teams that have a ton of money all offseason and they spend it and then they bring in guys and they stink. And they're not exactly what they thought they would be. And then they got to cut them after a year or two. So I just want to tell you to be careful, to have an objective mind about the Minnesota Vikings roster, because it's so easy to get hyped. And my job as a podcaster is to always keep you in the middle. When things look awful and terrible and it looks like there's no way of escaping, it's never as bad as you think it is. When everyone's saying doomsday, I'm the one saying, hey, it's not doomsday. And when everyone's saying, we're going to walk to the Super Bowl with our eyes closed, I'm saying, it's not that easy. It's not that easy. It's not going to be that easy. It's going to be a bumpy ride. So that's my take for the day. Be careful. Check out 5-Star Bath Solutions of Minneapolis for an amazing renovation, convenient timing, and great pricing. Thank you for watching this episode. Hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube or listening somewhere else.